I never thought I'd be sharing my own home alone horror story. I was always the skeptic, the one who laughed off ghost stories and rolled my eyes at friends who claimed their houses were haunted. But after what happened to me last winter, I can't shake the feeling that there are things in this world that defy explanation, things that lurk in the shadows of our own homes. It started innocently enough. My parents were going on a 2-week cruise, leaving me alone in our old Victorian house for the first time. I was thrilled at the prospect of having the place to myself. No curfews, no rules, just peace and quiet to focus on my college applications. The first few days were uneventful. I fell into a comfortable routine of studying, binge-watching TV shows, and enjoying the solitude. But on the 4th night, things began to change. I was up late, working on an essay in the study, when I heard it. A soft thump from upstairs, like something heavy falling on carpet. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Probably just the house settling, I told myself. But then I heard it again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. My heart began to race. I was certain I'd locked all the doors and windows. Grabbing my phone, I crept to the bottom of the stairs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then, a whisper so faint I almost missed it, "Come upstairs." I ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. The windows, too, seemed sealed shut. I was trapped. The footsteps grew louder, descending the stairs with agonizing slowness. I backed into the living room, searching frantically for a weapon. As I grabbed a fireplace poker, the lights flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. In the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains, I saw a figure step into the room. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs too long and jointed in impossible ways. As it turned towards me, I realized with horror that where its face should be, there was only a smooth, blank expanse of skin. I screamed, swinging the poker wildly. It passed right through the figure as if it were made of smoke. A cold laugh echoed through the room, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Who are you?" I gasped. "What do you want?" The figure tilted its head, and though it had no mouth, I heard its response clearly in my mind. "I am the guardian of this house. And you, my dear, are an intruder." "But this is my home," I protested. "I've lived here my whole life." Another laugh, colder this time. "Time means nothing to me. I've been here far longer than you can imagine." The figure began to move towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I backed away, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Suddenly, the room seemed to shift and distort around me. The walls stretched and warped, the floor beneath my feet becoming unstable. I felt like I was falling, tumbling through space and time. When the world stabilized, I found myself in a version of our living room I didn't recognize. The furniture was older, Victorian style, and a fire crackled in the hearth. A woman in an old-fashioned dress sat in a rocking chair, her back to me. "Hello?" I called out hesitantly. The woman turned, and I had to stifle a scream. Her face was gaunt, her eyes sunken and glowing with an otherworldly light. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice a raspy whisper. "He'll find you." "Who?" I asked, but I already knew the answer. "The guardian," she replied. "He guards the house, but but he's no protector. He feeds on fear, on the terror of those trapped between worlds. Before I could ask more, the room began to shift again. I caught glimpses of different eras, different families living in the house. And in each scene, I saw the tall, faceless figure lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting. I don't know how long I was trapped in that nightmarish loop, reliving the horrors experienced by past inhabitants of the house. When I finally snapped back to my own time, I was huddled in a corner of the living room, shaking uncontrollably. The faceless figure stood over me, its blank visage somehow radiating amusement. "Now you understand," it said in my mind. "This house has always been mine. You are merely temporary guests." I wanted to run, to scream, to fight back. But my body wouldn't respond. I felt a cold sensation spreading through my limbs, as if I were turning to stone. "Don't worry," the figure whispered. "You'll have company soon. Your parents will return, and the cycle will begin anew." As darkness crept into the edges of my vision, I realized with horror that this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of an eternal nightmare. Days blended into nights, and I lost all sense of time. The house became a labyrinth of shifting rooms and impossible geometry. Sometimes I'd find myself back in my own era, only to turn a corner and step into the past or some twisted version of the future. The faceless guardian was a constant presence, always watching, always waiting. I learned to fear the sound of its footsteps, the cold whisper of its thoughts in my mind. Other trapped souls drifted through the house. Some, like the Victorian woman, seemed aware of their fate. Others were lost in their own personal hells, reliving their final moments over and over. I tried to warn them, to help them escape, but it was useless. We were all caught in the guardian's web, flies trapped in the spider's parlor. One day or night, it was impossible to tell. I found myself in the attic. It was filled with artifacts from every era of the house's existence: old trunks, dusty paintings, toys left behind by long-dead children. As I sifted through the items, I found an old journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the handwriting faded. But as I read, a chill ran down my spine. The journal belonged to the original owner of the house, a man named Ezekiel Blackwood. He wrote of dark rituals and forbidden knowledge, of his quest for immortality at any cost. On the final page, in shaky handwriting, he had scrawled, "The ritual is complete. I am bound to the house for eternity. But at what cost? The entity I've summoned is no servant. It is a cruel master, and I its first victim. God forgive me for what I've unleashed." As I finished reading, I felt a cold presence behind me. The guardian loomed over me, its blank face inches from mine. "Now you know the truth," it whispered in my mind. "Ezekiel thought he could control me, but he only freed me. And now, you are all mine." I wanted to scream, to fight back, but I felt my will slipping away. The guardian was feeding on my fear, my despair, growing stronger with each passing moment. But as I felt myself fading, a new emotion surged through me: anger. Anger at Ezekiel for his hubris, anger at the guardian for its cruelty, and anger at myself for giving in to fear. With the last of my strength, I lunged forward, tackling the guardian. We fell, tumbling down the attic stairs, through layers of time and space. I caught glimpses of other trapped souls watching us with a mixture of fear and hope. We landed in the living room, in my own time. The guardian's form flickered and distorted, as if my attack had weakened it somehow. For the first time, I sensed uncertainty in its thoughts. "This isn't over," I growled, surprised by the strength in my voice. "I don't know how, but I'm going to find a way to end this. To free everyone you've trapped." The guardian let out a sound that might have been laughter, but there was an edge of unease to it. "Brave words, little one. But you are alone, and I am eternal." As it spoke, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A faint shimmer in the air, like heat haze. And behind it, barely visible, were faces. Dozens of them, centuries of trapped souls, all watching, all waiting. I realized then that I wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to change the rules of this twisted game. The guardian must have sensed my revelation. It lunged forward, its form twisting into something even more monstrous. But as its cold hands wrapped around my throat, I felt a surge of energy. The trapped souls were lending me their strength, their collective will to break free. As darkness crept into my vision, I knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war, a battle for the very soul of this house. And somehow, I would find a way to win. The last thing I heard before losing consciousness was the guardian's voice, tinged with something I'd never heard from it before: fear. "This isn't over," it hissed. "The house is mine. You are mine. Forever." But as I slipped into darkness, I held on to a glimmer of hope. Because now I knew the truth, and knowledge is power. The guardian's days were numbered, even if it didn't know it yet. And so, my story doesn't end here. It's merely the opening chapter in a tale of terror, redemption, and the battle for freedom against an ancient evil. A battle that would push me to the limits of sanity and beyond, forcing me to confront horrors both supernatural and all too human. The true nightmare, I realized, was just beginning. And somewhere in the twisted corridors of that haunted house, a clock began to tick, counting down to a confrontation that would determine not just my fate, but the fate of every soul trapped within those cursed walls. I awoke with a start, my head pounding and my throat sore from the guardian's attack. For a moment, I thought I was back in my own room, that it had all been a terrible nightmare. But as my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized I was in the basement, a part of the house I'd always avoided. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and wrong. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars containing things I couldn't, and didn't want to, identify. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, its surface stained dark with what I hoped wasn't blood. As I struggled to my feet, I heard whispers all around me. The trapped souls were trying to communicate, their voices a cacophony of warnings and pleas. I closed my eyes, trying to focus on a single voice. The book, a woman's voice, cut through the chaos. "Find the book." I scanned the room, my eyes landing on an ancient tome resting on a pedestal in the corner. As I approached it, the whispers grew more frantic. The book seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and I hesitated before touching it. Taking a deep breath, I opened the cover. The pages were filled with symbols and diagrams that hurt my eyes to look at, the text written in a language I didn't recognize. But as I flipped through the pages, the words began to shift and change, becoming readable. It was Ezekiel Blackwood's grimoire, the source of the ritual that had bound the guardian to the house. And within its pages, I hoped, lay the key to undoing what he had done. A cold laugh echoed through the basement. "Do you really think it will be that easy?" the guardian's voice mocked in my mind. Ezekiel spent years studying the dark arts. "What hope does a child like you have?" I gritted my teeth, clutching the book to my chest. "I'm not alone," I said defiantly. "And I have something Ezekiel didn't, a reason to break the curse, not create it." The guardian materialized before me, its form shifting and twisting. "You are nothing," it hissed. "A speck of dust in the face of eternity. I have broken stronger souls than yours." But as it spoke, I felt a surge of strength. The trapped souls were rallying behind me, their combined will creating a barrier between me and the guardian. I had a chance, however slim, to end this nightmare. I began to read from the grimoire, the words feeling strange and heavy on my tongue. The basement shook, dust raining down from the ceiling. The guardian let out a howl of rage and lunged for me, but an invisible force held it back. As I continued the incantation, the house itself seemed to groan and shift. Cracks appeared in the walls, widening to reveal swirling voids beyond. I caught glimpses of other times, other places, the layers of reality peeling back like an onion. The guardian's form began to fracture, pieces of it being pulled into the voids. "Stop," it screamed in my mind. "You don't know what you're doing. You'll destroy everything." But I couldn't stop. The words poured out of me, fueled by the collective will of all the souls the guardian had trapped over the centuries. The basement was crumbling around us, the veil between worlds growing thinner by the second. In a last, desperate attempt, the guardian changed tactics. Its form shifted, taking on the appearance of my parents. "Please," it begged in my mother's voice. "You're hurting us. Stop this madness." I faltered for a moment, tears stinging my eyes. But the touch of the trapped souls reminded me of the truth. This was just another of the guardian's tricks. With a final, thunderous word, I completed the ritual. The guardian let out a scream that shook the foundations of reality. Its form exploded into a million shards of darkness, each one sucked into a different void. The house shuddered and groaned, the walls melting away like wax. I found myself floating in a sea of swirling chaos, surrounded by the liberated souls of the guardian's victims. They smiled at me, their forms growing brighter and more distinct as the curse's hold on them weakened. "Thank you," the Victorian woman said, her voice clear for the first time. "We can finally move on." One by one, the souls faded away, finding their way to whatever lay beyond. But as the last of them disappeared, I realized with a growing sense of dread that I was still here, lost in the void between worlds. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the emptiness. "Is anyone there?" Silence was my only answer. I floated in the nothingness, unsure of how much time was passing. Was this to be my fate? Trapped in limbo for eternity, the price for freeing the others? Just as despair began to overtake me, I saw a pinprick of light in the distance. It grew larger, taking on a familiar shape, the outline of a door. My door, in my room, in my house. With the last of my strength, I swam through the void towards that welcoming rectangle of light. As I reached out to touch the doorknob, I heard a voice, the guardian's voice, whisper one last time in my mind. I closed my eyes, unsure of how to even begin explaining what had happened. How could I tell them that our house had been a prison for countless souls? That I had battled an ancient evil and barely survived? But as I heard their footsteps on the stairs, a chill ran down my spine. The guardian's final words echoed in my mind. This wasn't over. And next time, it might not just be coming for me. I realized then that my journey wasn't finished. I had won a victory, but the war, as the guardian said, was far from over. There were other houses out there, other trapped souls in need of liberation. And now that I knew the truth about what lurked in the shadows, I couldn't simply go back to my normal life. As my parents' footsteps reached the top of the stairs, I made a decision. I would find a way to tell them the truth, to make them understand. And then, somehow, I would find a way to continue the fight against the darkness. Because if I didn't, who would? The guardian was still out there, weakened but not destroyed. And I had a feeling it wasn't the only entity of its kind. My mom knocked on the door. "Sweetie, are you awake?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation to come. "Come in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "There's something I need to tell you." As the door opened and my parents stepped in, their smiles fading as they saw the serious look on my face, I knew that my life would never be the same. The normal world of college applications and teenage concerns seemed a lifetime away now. I was a warrior now, whether I wanted to be or not. A protector against forces most people couldn't even imagine. And as I began to tell my story, watching the disbelief and then the dawning horror on my parents' faces, I silently vowed to be ready for whatever came next. Because the guardian was right about one thing, this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into research, poring over every book on the occult and paranormal I could find. My parents, though still skeptical, supported me as best they could. They didn't fully believe my story, but they couldn't deny the haunted look in my eyes or the way I flinched at shadows. I began to notice things I'd overlooked before. Whispers in empty rooms, fleeting movements at the corner of my vision. The veil between worlds had been thinned, and now I could sense the other side pressing against reality. One night, as I was deep in study, my computer screen flickered. A face formed in the static, the Victorian woman I'd seen in the house. "He's coming," she whispered, her voice tinged with static. "He's found a way back. You need to be ready." The screen went dark, leaving me alone in the silence of my room. But I wasn't afraid. I was prepared. I gathered the tools I'd collected, blessed candles, iron filings, a silver mirror said to reflect true forms. I drew the protective sigils I'd learned from Ezekiel's grimoire around my bed. As the clock struck midnight, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost formed on the windows, and I could see my breath misting in the air. "I told you I'd return," the guardian's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "Did you really think you could defeat me so easily?" I stood my ground, holding the silver mirror before me like a shield. "I beat you once," I said, my voice steady. "I'll do it again." The guardian laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You got lucky, child. This time, I'm prepared." The shadows in the room deepened, coalescing into a form I recognized all too well. The guardian stood before me, its blank face somehow radiating malice. But as it reached for me, I saw something in the mirror, not the twisted form of the guardian, but a scared, broken man. Ezekiel Blackwood, the one who had started all of this. In that moment, I understood. The guardian wasn't some ancient evil, it was Ezekiel himself, twisted by the dark forces he tried to control. And in understanding, I found power. "Ezekiel," I said softly, "it's time to let go. Time to move on." The guardian, Ezekiel, froze. "How did you?" "I see you," I said, holding up the mirror. the real you. And I forgive you." A keening wail filled the room as Ezekiel's form began to fracture. "No," he cried. "I can't. I don't deserve." "Everyone deserves peace," I said, stepping forward. "Even you." As I touched the guardian's arm, its form dissolved into mist. In its place stood Ezekiel as he must have been in life, a tired, sad-looking man with haunted eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, and then he was gone, leaving behind only a lingering chill in the air. I sank to my knees, exhausted but triumphant. It was over, truly over this time. The house was free, and so were all the souls trapped within it. But as I looked at the books scattered around my room, the artifacts I'd collected, I knew that my journey was far from over. There were other houses out there, other lost souls in need of help. And now, I had the knowledge and the power to make a difference. As the first light of dawn broke through my window, I began to pack a bag. It was time to leave the safety of home behind and seek out those who needed my help. The world was bigger and stranger than I'd ever imagined, full of both darkness and light. And I was ready to face it all. As I shouldered my backpack and headed for the door, I cast one last look around my room. It felt like saying goodbye to my old life, to the person I used to be. But I wasn't afraid. I was excited for what lay ahead. Because now I knew the truth, that reality is far more vast and mysterious than we can imagine. And in that vastness, there are wonders and terrors beyond belief. But there are also those who stand against the darkness, who fight to protect the innocent and free the trapped. And now, I was one of them. My name is your name, and this is the beginning of my story. The true story of a normal teenager turned monster hunter, guardian of the veil between worlds. And believe me, the horrors I've seen so far are just the tip of the iceberg. So lock your doors, check under your bed, and never ignore those strange noises in the night. Because the monsters are real, and they're closer than you think. But remember, there are also heroes out there, working in the shadows to keep you safe. And who knows? Maybe one day, you'll join our ranks. The fight against darkness is eternal, and we can always use another warrior of the light. Until then, sleep tight. And if you hear something go bump in the night, well, you know who to call.